Good morning, everyone. I'm hoping now people can hear me. So some feedback from the chat would be great to let me know that you can hear me. This is Sonia, and lovely, thank you. People are saying that. Thank you very much. I apologise for our technical hitch, entirely unanticipated, and thank you for everyone who stayed with us. And I'm glad it was no more than 5 or 6 minutes, no longer. And I hope we haven't lost anyone on the way. Okay, so this is an hour-long webinar. Well, it's a bit shorter now because of what's happened, but thank you all and welcome. And what I'd like to do, I don't think we'll have many people joining us now, but very quickly, there's going to be a number of polls or surveys during the webinar. And very quickly, I want to take you to the first one, which is a way that we can just find out a bit more about you and also what action learning means to you now. So while I know 1 or 2 of you, I can see from the list, actually I don't know everybody, and it'd be great to hear your replies to this poll. So I think it's open now, and I can hear some typing. And in just a moment, my colleague's going to close it. I think we've heard from everyone. Okay. I've just got to wait a second to see it. But what we want to do, I'm going to move on to the, okay, so let's have a look. Okay, so some people know a bit about action learning, and some just want to know more. So you're in the right place for that, so thank you very much. What I want to do now, I'm going to show you what we mean to do today. It's an hour-long webinar. We're going to look at what action learning is and its origins. And the origins are important because they show us why action learning is good for organisational performance. I'm going to do 1 or 2 learning theories which explain the mechanism and why it works. And we're going to try for a taster. Now, it's not going to be a full-blown action learning set, but it's going to be a small taster to give you a kind of a, just a sense of it. So that's what we need to do. And there are a number of polls throughout. And if people have got questions, we'll leave some space at the end and take extra questions. So what I want to do now is introduce myself as the main presenter. My name is Sonia Antel. I'm the Director of Action Learning Associates, and I've been focusing almost entirely on action learning. Well, it's almost more years than I care to own up to, so about 18 years. It's been the primary focus of my work. In the last 3 years, I'm also Director of Action Learning Associates. So as well as doing and delivering action learning and facilitator training for action learning, I'm also involved in quite a lot of design to help organisations use action learning in their work and their different programs. John's going to do a short action learning presentation later for our taster, but if I can hand over for you, John, just to say a few words about yourself.
Yeah, I've been involved in action learning since 2004 and with virtual action learning since 2008, I think. I'm chairman of the International Foundation for Action Learning, and what we do is support networks of action learning people around the world, and we promote the use of action learning. I've worked myself with people from 25 countries. I was counting it out the other day.
Wow.
Both face-to-face and virtually. And what I find endlessly inspiring about action learning and the action learning philosophy is that it seems to transcend cultural and linguistic differences.
Okay, that's lovely, John. Thank you very much. So what I want to do now is just a learning check-in. So I want you to take a few moments to think about how you want to be present in this session today. Action learning is a very mindful approach in that it only works when people need to be really, really present. So I want you to think about 2 things. How you're going to get the most out of this session and how you want to listen to achieve your learning objective. How you listen in daily life and how you want to listen here. So what I'm going to do now is talk about what action learning actually is. It's a group learning process of self-managed learning. An action learning group is commonly called a set. So you'll hear me this morning talking about action learning sets, and that's the group. And it's important to say what action learning is, as it is to say what it's not. And it's not about discussion or advice or telling. It's a process that arrives at deep reflective learning, which gets both new insights and new action, and as a result, real behaviour change. We've got a great quote here from Stuart Wallace, who's just finished working with us. I learnt so much from my fellow participants. Joining a set isn't nice for a chief executive, it's essential, which is lovely when we get that kind of feedback. Now, there's a huge range of action learning models and methodologies, and you could spend days on this. There's a peer consultancy model. There's a laser model, and there's a great project-based action learning model developed by Eric DeHaan. And we won't, in this instance, be looking at those. We're going to stay with the classic action that's developed by Reg Revens. So I'm going to tell you the story of where action learning came from. I know one or two of you will have heard it, so bear with me. Lots of you won't. But what I want you to do is, listening to it, just really notice the place where Reg used action learning to shift organisational performance. And that's the real power of this story. So, where did action learning come from? Oh, now I'm being told I'm a little muffled. I'll see, is that a bit better?
Yeah, that's better, Sonia.
Okay, great, thank you. And thank you for the feedback, because I certainly wouldn't have known. Thank you. Okay, feel free to let me know again. So, this is Reg Revens. And I was struck in putting the webinar together that really original British business or leadership thinkers are actually quite thin on the ground. And I think that their insight are often overshadowed, if you like, by more powerful or more marketable management trends or leaders from overseas. And this was definitely true for Reg Revens. A very unassuming English name there for those of you whose English is a first language, very unassuming name. And you can see he's also really unassuming looking gentleman, really unassuming person. However, as a young man, Reg competed in the 1998 Olympics in the long jump, and I believe he was a medal winner. He was also an experimental physicist at Cambridge, where he completed his PhD. And he was part of the team which was led by Rutherford, which won the Nobel Prize for splitting the atom. Now, this was in the late 1930s, and Reg was also a Quaker. And some of you will know what that means. But as a Quaker, he could see how splitting the atom was going to be applied in the war, and he was a pacifist. And as a result, instead of doing anything radical, he just chose to lead the research team rather than work on this application. Now, he was by then a man of some modest renown. He had the groundbreaking work and the Nobel Prize, under his belt, if you like, and he was kind of recognised as an athlete, not akin to our current kind of fame that we have now in social media, but even so, at that time he was widely sought, for positions in industry and government, and the one that he accepted was it was called the Director of Education at the National Coal Board. Now, at the time, in the late 30s, the coal industry in Britain was the largest employer in the country, but it was really troubled with a whole range of, productivity and performance problems. So what Reg about how, as an adult, he had learnt best. And there were some things he reflected on. One was the long tradition of coaching in sport. Now, I don't know if any of you people are sports people, or have ever done any sports coaching, But there's a real classic tradition of coaching in sport that's well respected. And Reg also looked back at the supervision that happened in the Cambridge laboratories. And what they did there, instead of having meetings where people routinely talked about, how well I've done, how hard I've worked, how difficult something was, they brought their work and their research, and they always brought the challenges and the problems that they were facing. So Reg applied those principles to what became the first action learning pilot. Now, the coal industry, it's a manufacturing industry. I don't know if we've got anybody from manufacturing on the call, I'm not sure. But the manufacturing industry is really rich on data. And in the coal industry, this was things like the volume of coal being extracted per seam, the length of time a piece of machinery was faulty, how long it took to get something repaired, as well as the kind of organisational data that we're more familiar with, such as attendance, sickness, and time lost from accidents and the like. So a real wealth of data. Now, Reg is a scientist and is well used to data. So what he did was select the worst performing pits in two different regions in the country. I think it was Wales and Kent, and invited the managers of those pits, the pit managers, to come together for a day's meeting and work on the challenges in their individual situations. And they developed and used this action learning process where they learnt from their own and each other's failures and problems rather than from expert instruction. And in this way, he developed the classic action learning methodology we'll get a taster of. But what's really impressive is by the end of the year, those 12 pits, which had been the worst performing on this really rigorous data, had made so many changes in their organisation and their management, their leadership, their way of working, that all 12 were outperforming the others. So Reg was a man way ahead of his time, partly in terms of evaluating learning, but also a kind of real action learning and pioneer. So a great story, and that's the origins of action learning and the work that we try and replicate when we can. We replicate. So unpicking this, where does learning actually come from? And I'm not talking now about being taught, being instructed, that kind of thing. And Reg spent a lot of time on this, and how he expressed it was that learning comes from programmed knowledge. And programmed knowledge is our conceptual material, it's the work that we've studied, it's theories, practices, formal education, and the like. But that must essentially be combined with questioning insight. And that's the piece that happens in an action learning set, the questioning insight, not the programmed knowledge. Now, Reg described this, I suppose he's a scientist, he described it as an equation, L equals E to P plus Q. And when we work with this material, when we're training people, we often intentionally have the P as tiny, because this nature of reflective learning essentially comes from questioning insight, which does challenge the way we often look at sort of leadership development, where we expect to be taught and have inspiring speakers and so on. And that has a place, but action learning is looking at something different. So Reg also described it as being based on the idea that people have an unlimited capacity to learn from experience, but a limited capacity to learn from being taught. And people will be familiar from that. You get tired if you have to listen. You'll get tired if you have to listen to me too long right now. So how and why did it actually work? Okay, what actually happens? I'm going to show you a couple of learning theories now. I won't do Kolb's learning cycle because I know that you'll be familiar with that. But I'll look at a theory that really speaks to action learning. Okay. Now this is called the ladder of inference, and it was developed by Chris Argyros, when he was working on overcoming organisational defences. And what it does, it explains how we tend to make sense of the world. We live in a world of self-generating beliefs which can easily be untested, and we arrive at these beliefs because they're based on conclusions, they're drawn from what we've seen in the past, and they build on our experience. Now that's very conceptual and possibly not specially illuminating. So what I'm going to do is just give you a personal example to try and bring this alive, and then give you a sense of what actually happens to build reflective learning in action learning. So, another story, a real story. I was recently making a presentation to a senior team about action learning and organisation development. Everyone's really engaged and alert, except one person who, to protect the innocent, we're going to call Jeff. He's looking away, he's quiet, he's serious, he seems a bit moody. He doesn't say a single thing, doesn't ask a question, or offer anything until I finish the presentation. And then all he says is, well, let's have a full report, which I think is kind of corporate speak for let's move on. And at that point, everyone sort of shuffles and shifts, and before you know it, the meeting's over. Now, Jeff obviously thinks I'm incompetent, which is a shame because it's precisely his part of the organisation that needs the work. And now I think of it, he's clearly power hungry to come in at that last moment. By the time I've sat down, having been stood up presenting, by the time I've sat down, I've decided actually I'm going to be really careful about what I put in the report, because he could use it against me and use it against the work. And I'm feeling it's a real shame that I've already got a detractor on the senior management team, given everyone else just seems to be really, really motivated and fascinated. So what's happened here? In the seconds, literally seconds before I sit down, I've climbed what Chris Argyris calls a common mental pathway of increasing abstraction, often built on misguided beliefs. And unpicking it, down here, I did start with Jeff being quiet and serious, and his observable comment, let's have a report. I selected other data from what I saw, the way he didn't make a lot of eye contact or whatever, his serious face. And from that, I added some meanings of my own. I decided he was bored, I made an assumption he wanted me to finish, and I concluded he thought, I was incompetent. And, before I sat down, I'm virtually plotting against him. And this happened so quickly, and it seems so reasonable, it doesn't seem outrageous or anything. And what's surprising is, unless it's unpicked, I'm not even aware I've done it. The only visible part down here is actually Jeff's comment and the action I've yet to take about guarding my report, feeling I've got an enemy in the camp. And next time Jeff calls me, I see him in the corridor, our paths cross, I'm going to assume that his view of me and my work is unhelpful. And what's happening here is this is a reflexive loop in that Jeff, who may be a quiet and serious person, every time I see that, I'm going to think, well, there we are, Jeff acting as a detractor again. So what's this got to do with action learning? Action learning helps us unpick this ladder of inference. It helps us look at the assumptions that we make that are not usually challenged in our work life. Down here, Jeff may have been bored, and he may think I'm incompetent, but it's just as likely that he's a thoughtful person, that he's serious. He may be shy, he may be concerned not to embarrass me. But unless I do something and leap up here, I'm never going to know. Okay. So what you'll see in action learning again and again is people being challenged to unpick these assumptions. And this effectively is the development of reflective learning. And it's learning which goes beyond solving a current problem and looks at underlying mental models and the assumptions that we hold. And it can be a real challenge to embody reflective learning in an organisation strategy. So I'll be really interested to hear your views here. And we've got a second poll or second survey that I'm going to make available to you. And so the question is, how much do you think your organisation currently embodies reflective learning? Deep down reflective learning. We'll just take a moment. It's going to be great to hear. We've got a whole range of L&D and OD people with us. And it's just a straw poll. So I think we've got everyone's answer. I'm going to see the results in just a second. Okay, thank you for participating. Okay, so we're getting I'm getting a range of very little and moderately. 37%, a third of you said that the organisation embodies reflective learning very little. Okay, 6% said very well. So I have to congratulate you there, whoever said that. But mostly people are saying not at all, very little, or moderately. And we're not surprised about that because it's genuinely really difficult to do. It's genuinely difficult to do. So thank you for that first kind of cut of view. So how does it actually work in an action learning set? You'll get a taster shortly, but a situation is described, a problem is described, a challenge is described, and we call the person in action learning terms who does that, we call them the presenter. They gain new perspectives, new understanding or clarity on the situation. They'll explore different options and choose one and take action. And at the next meeting, they'll review their progress. So that looks quite simple, but it's a very, very rigorous process. So how does this add up to actually making a difference to organisational performance? What you get is, because an action learning set starts with what we call it a presenter, but the person who's owning their problem or challenge or issue with their cold pits, if we go back to Red's example, because the space is focused on the presenter and the presenter's reflective learning and insight, we get a really high degree of ownership as a result of membership in an action learning set. And what that means is people's very high in-depth and personal in-depth understanding of what's needed means they're committed to taking action. And they leave the set and almost always do something that they wouldn't have done had they not been in the set. They do it with conviction, they do it with understanding. And as a result, people's behaviour changes. So what we see is sort of real lasting behavioural change as a result of being in an action learning set. And we describe that, the combination of insight, reflective learning, insight, and change behaviour adds up to action learning sort of operating in a place where reflective learning really contributes to organisational change and organisational development and organisational performance. So once somebody is on the path of reflective learning, they don't unlearn that. They don't go backwards. So in a program where action learning is supporting a leadership strand, for instance, you'll have a group of, say, 8 leaders working in action learning set, all making profound personal, committed changes in behaviour outside of the sets. And that is witnessed and experienced by their direct reports or their managers or their peers. And it adds up to quite kind of critical mass, really. And as soon as you have more sets, you get a real ripple effect. And we've got some great examples where we've worked on really large programs, and we can talk about that. There's lots of examples where I can, practical examples, which I guess could be subject to another webinar. We've worked on used action learning applications where action learning has been used in restructuring programs, which is a pretty difficult, pretty demanding kind of application. And as a result, people end up becoming part of the solution rather than the problem. And that can change the whole process of the restructuring situation. We've used action learning in employee engagement programs, where people become way more proactive in their roles at all levels of the organisation. And another application is a kind of confidence and resilience in leaders to become, sort of more courageous in the workplace, if you like, have more guts, be able to be stronger, be clearer. So there's some really strong applications. And given we do see lasting behavioural change, it does mean that action learning provides a really great return on investment. We have some really powerful examples. I was given one just last week in our Advanced Practitioners Day, where somebody talked about a presentation they'd made in the past, an action they took in the workplace, and saving at least £50,000 of a resource because they'd made a decision based on better judgment. So some really powerful examples we've got there, really, really powerful examples. So what do you get out of it personally? Some of you, I think, have been in a set and will know, and some of you haven't. People talk about a group of peers and a chance to sharing. You get structured reflection time on difficult issues, the kind of things that keep you awake at night. You get support and challenge, and reflective learning is genuinely exciting. It's people describe it as fresh and as exciting and kind of quite, really kind of motivating. So I've got another question I want to ask you, another poll, and then I'll show you another. Then we'll go and have a presentation again. And this is about how much lasting behavioural change do you see as a result of the learning and development initiatives you've been involved in over the last 18 months? So genuinely lasting behavioural change, the programme may be finished, the coaching, the development initiative may be finished. How many people will you look back at, what percentage of people do you look back and say, yeah, that's stuck, that really lasted? So again, it'll just be interesting at kind of a straw poll. Excuse me. I don't know if everyone's done it or not. And again, it's not the most scientific, but it's great to get people's views. I think I'm about to get the results. Yeah, thank you again for participating in this. Okay, now that is fascinating. There's a clear third that is saying some. We've got quite a lot of people saying none and very little. And again, we've got another 6% saying a great deal. I would float the possibility that that's the same 6% who are saying they're getting reflective learning. So some is what we're seeing. Some, not a great deal, but some. So thank you for that. Thank you for that. Now, what we're going to do is have just a taster of action learning. First of all, I forgot to talk about this. This is another example of something that you can get out of an action learning set. And this was an application, a particular application where we were working with a team. This was an engineering company, a global engineering company called Sandvik Coromant. I don't know that we've got any engineers. There's nobody I know on the list as an engineer. And what the program was an action learning program where we worked with a team who were a very disparate team. They had global or local roles, but didn't connect well together. And over the life of this set, they each had to deliver a project using the action learning set as the mechanism. And at the very beginning of the program, beginning of April, we ran a facilitated exercise looking at the best and worst team behaviours and team descriptors. And actually, they were wonderful people, all engineers, very practical people, very big in their football. So I got some great descriptors of what great teams do and what the worst teams do. And we drew out a big continuum. And on that scale that we developed together, we did an anonymous poll, and the team scored themselves in April on a 3 and 10. Now, not a dysfunctional team, but just not a team that was working as a team, all working separately. When we finished the action learning program, and the projects were largely delivered to quite a significant degree, as a mechanism of capturing their learning, we ran the same facilitated exercise, and they scored themselves as an anonymous, on an anonymous poll at 7.2. And while that's a great shift, what was really great is they were able to say what they needed to do to get themselves to a 9 or a 10. Now, they were not even able to articulate that in April because they hadn't experienced it. There's some great shared learning going on there, just great. So that's a teamwork application. And we don't generally do action learning in teams because it's quite a sophisticated application, but it can be incredibly powerful. So I'm going to move over, so you're going to start hearing a bit less of me and a bit more from John. So everyone's going to get the chance now to participate in a short taster. John is going to very generously has offered to present briefly. And for those of you who are new to action learning, I don't mean present actually in the sense in which I am doing with PowerPoint and the like. In action learning term, the presenter is the person who brings their challenge or their problem. It could have been the pit manager talking about absenteeism on Mondays or whatever. But for now, it's going to be John presenting on something. We'll hear from John, and then I'm going to get people via the chat function to offer John some open questions. Now, we haven't got time right now to do exercises on open questions, but I do want to offer you a thought before we start with John, and that is just take a moment to think, and feel free to reply and let us know, to think, why do we ask questions in daily life? What is the purpose of asking questions in daily life? Now, I don't know if anybody's, if we're going to get any chat reply, but the kind, kind of thing we usually see and hear, is to get better answers, to engage with others. That's interesting. There's a real kind of clarification piece, and a relational piece in asking questions. So to get closer to people, to understand things better, to get answers. Clarification, to get understanding, to learn. So really good examples of why we ask questions, and asking questions in daily life is really generally considered a good thing. It's an even better thing in action learning because what we're looking to do here is ask questions to get, as I think one of our replies has said, to get deeper understanding and reflection. So the questions I want us to think about for the next 10 minutes or so will be questions that are for the presenter. So for John now, not for me to understand or to learn something, but for John. So it's a different orientation of why we ask questions. So what we'll do, we'll get John to present briefly, and it's very generous of you to do this, John. While he's presenting, we'll just invite questions. We won't have the full action learning set dynamic because of this particular mechanism in the webinar, but then I'll come back to John and get John to choose which questions to respond to. It's not likely we'll get some articulation of the problem, and we'll have some action learning experience. I wouldn't expect in the very short time we've got to get to action, but hopefully the questions will take us some of the journey in terms of reflective learning. So John, are you comfortable if I pass over to you now?
Yep. Can I just check that you can hear me properly?
I can hear you fine, yeah. Yes, and people are telling us that they can hear you, which is great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your feedback there, everyone.
So I deliberately haven't scripted this because it's a real and it's current, more an opportunity than a problem. So I guess I'll be very interested to hear what I have to say.
Yes.
I was asked to write a chapter for a book, and the theme of the chapter was virtual action learning. So I wrote the chapter, and it took me the best part of 6 weeks, and just as I finished, the publisher decided that they weren't going to produce the book after all. So I'm sort of left stranded. Well, not stranded, but I'm left with this chapter that I would like to do something with. I would like to get it published. So my opportunity now is to find a different publisher. Now the reason I'm interested in virtual action learning is because I read this statistic that in the UK we spend something like £25 billion a year on business travel. So that's people going to different parts of the country for a 2-hour meeting, and if we could just create virtual spaces which are productive, effective, compelling, we could reduce travel time, obviously, we could reduce costs, obviously, but most important to me is that we could reduce our carbon footprint. So that's why I'm really interested in virtual action learning. And I do also think that it's just a fantastic learning environment if it's set up correctly, and if we can get it right, and if we can persuade people that it's a great environment to work in. So my what keeps going around in my mind is, where can I publish this thing where it will get a wide and varied readership, and not just the usual action learning community, and where it will have greatest impact. And I guess what I'd like questions on are, I was just smiled because I saw Andreas's question about we ask questions to, or comment rather, we ask questions to show how clever we are. That's often the case. And then Eric's commented, we ask questions to help reflect and for deeper understanding. And I guess I would like questions which will just help me think in a different way. What I'm doing at the moment is looking for publishers and seeing what publications they have already, seeing who the audiences are. So I just need to just maybe think in a slightly different way to find the right publisher, or do something different. So any questions around that and my relationship with my opportunity or problem would be very helpful.
Okay. All right. Thank you, John. So we're going to take a few moments for people to type open questions and questions to help John think differently. I had one, and as I spoke, it left my mind entirely. I think we've got one or two clarifying questions coming through. So what I'm going to do is open the questions for John. We'll just take a moment. I've got a different question at the moment, John, which is, and I know your opportunities going forward, but what would you do differently if this arose again already? What would you do differently?
If what? Sorry, Sonia.
You've said you spent 6 weeks working on a chapter that didn't get published.
Oh, yeah.
Going forward, what might you do differently?
I'm not sure what I could do differently, because when I started and right up until I finished, there was a publisher there. It's only as I finished that the publisher withdrew. Well, this is what I could do, obviously. And it's partly as a result of my inexperience, but I think the normal process, if you're working with a publisher, is to send in a proposal, it's then accepted, then you get given a contract. And because I was sort of doing this for a friend, as a request from a friend, I didn't bother with the contract.
Okay.
So that's, yes, thank you, that's what I could do.
All right. So there's quite a lot of questions, John. Can I get you to select the question that you think is, select a couple of questions, or as many as we have time for, that is going to take you somewhere useful?
Okay. I'm not seeing many of the questions. Oh, I think they're coming up now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Question from Ed: how widely are you defining publisher? What I'm thinking, Ed, I'm probably not thinking books, because the book that my chapter was going to be in was an edited volume, and there might not be too many of those around. So what I'm thinking now, magazines, journals, including academic journals. I have thought about doing it myself online. I've thought about chunking it down into various blogs that can be put on websites. And I have to say, I'm not an expert in any of this. This is so fairly new to me. So there are probably other places that I haven't yet thought about.
I was going to offer you Wesley's question there, John. How did it make you feel?
How did it make me feel when I was turned down?
I don't know. It's just, how did it make you feel? I guess so.
Okay. Actually, sorry, I'm saying turned down. I wasn't turned down. It's just that they just decided not to do the book. How did it make me feel? Actually, I was quite pleased in a way, because the edited volume was being produced by a Canadian publisher who I'd never heard of, and the volume was going to be largely about technology, and it was for emerging leaders who were interested in manufacturing and technology. So I thought, when they decided not to publish, that I could find somewhere much better for my own purposes, which were again around carbon footprint, reducing that.
Okay. Are there any other questions there that grab you?
I'm just looking down. I'm just reading them now. A question from Tim: what methods do you see others using for getting a message heard? Well, social media is the thing that comes to mind, and I have to admit to being a bit of a wuss when it comes to social media. So I do use LinkedIn. I tinker with Twitter from time to time. it's not within my comfort zone. But I think Tim might have a point there. Maybe I should just have a go and stop being scared of it. But it's not. I mean, it's not something that comes naturally. But that's not to say that I can't find somebody to help me. There's a question about tell us about how the actual material you've written is targeted and what might be needed to adapt it. Well, it's targeted at people who might want to implement a virtual action learning program. So it's and it starts right from scratch. So it describes action learning, it describes virtual action learning, it describes some of the technologies that you might use, but it describes mainly how you operate in the virtual space, how people operate, how we work together, and it gives a framework for setting up a virtual action learning program. So how I might adapt that, it could all be chunked down because it's quite a big chapter and it's all encompassing. So as I said before, it could be chunked down. So I think that is a real possibility. So yeah, thanks for that, Ed. So let me just scroll down. Tell me to stop when you want me, Sonia.
No, certainly take another question, if not two.
Yeah, question from Andreas. Where would you like the article to appear, if anything were possible? Well,
what's the laugh, John? Can I ask you what's the laugh?
What's the laugh? I suppose I was thinking something like the, Times Higher Educational Supplement, something like that. But I mean, it's too big for that. And other people are asking questions about how can we chunk it down. Yeah. So, and I think I'm laughing because there's kind of a snub value there on my own part that it should be in a nice, prestigious publication somewhere. So I'm laughing at myself. But good question, and one I'll have to just think about. But it does make me wonder why I might be limiting myself to something easy, something easier. Yeah, but thank you for that, Chris.
We've certainly got time for another one. There's still a couple of good questions coming forward, John.
Well, one from I think it's Naif, and apologies if I've got that wrong, but the writing's so small on my screen I can't quite read it. The question is, if you hadn't been approached by the publisher, what would you have done to get the word out about virtual action learning? I think probably just written the odd blog about experiences, about my own experiences. What was really what I really enjoyed about what I did with the chapter was I didn't say how I wrote it, but I got groups of practitioners together and we had discussions about their experiences of virtual action learning. So the chapter itself uses their own words and then weaves what they've said into a narrative about virtual action learning. So that doesn't quite answer the question, but I would have gone on sort of fairly passively, just talking about it here and there, maybe writing blogs. But having written this chapter, I feel that's quite a step to take, and also engaging with the wider practitioner community and getting their views on virtual action learning as well has been really interesting.
Okay.
Nice, I got it right, thank you.
I'm going to have to stop you there, John, just because of time, but actually there's some lovely questions there.
Yes, thank you.
I like the kind of openness in Andreas. If you could, if you could have it, the article anywhere, where would you have it? And what does being published represent to you? Great open question, just arrived in there.
And just to say, I'll save these questions and they'll go on working later. So thank you for them all.
Okay. So yes, thank you for that, and thank you very much, John, for putting this challenge out there. Now, John is actually a really skilled action learning facilitator and has done, extensive work on developing a reflective space with open questions. So he got to choose his questions here. What you didn't see because of our delivery mechanism here is we didn't get to actions. We didn't have time for that. We didn't spend as much time on the questioning or seeing the kind of reflective thing unpick. But it was clear that John was thinking. It was clear, even in the smile in reply to, I think, Andreas's question. It was clear that he was thinking, and that's the step in developing reflective learning. So thank you for that. So we're about to finish up. This is our references slide, so some of the references that we've made for the material. And in conclusion, I just wanted to kind of reiterate that action learning provides us with a kind of a structure and a process to develop reflective learners. And what that does is really embed lasting behavioural change in, learning and development or organisation development or change programs. And we find and we get told and we see action learning set members developing lifelong problem solving skills as a result. And collectively, the sort of impact of cohorts of people doing this and bringing it back to their workplace, to their managers, their peers, their teams, significantly shifts organisational performance in the right direction. So Reg Evans measured that in the coal industry going way back to the 50s, and now we're starting to do that in other sectors. So thank you all very much for joining with us for this hour. I'm sorry we started just a little late, but it wasn't as late as it might have been just about. And thank you for presenting and for everyone's questions and really interesting reflections on how much you embedding behavioural change and using reflective learning in your organisation. So I want to thank you. We've got a final closing poll, which would be great if you can take a moment, if you can, a way of tracking how you feel the webinar was helpful for you or not, and our kind of view on something you take away. So give you just a moment to do that. Thank you all. Thank you all for that. I really appreciate it. And again, if there's anything we can do and you wanted to talk about any of these applications in the future, feel free to be in touch. Really enjoyed it. It's the first webinar that we've done for Action Learning Associates. We've done lots of free tasters, so this is a different approach. And I'm sure that we'll repeat it again. So thank you. And I wish you all a good day. Oh, thank you. We're getting some lovely comments. So yes, goodbye to everyone, and thank you. And I'm glad, I'm really glad to have had you with us today.